Welcome to another episode of VisaMate. My name is Mahmudul Hasan. I'm an immigration attorney. I've been practicing immigration in the United States for the last 6 years. In today's video, we are going to cover the most commonly asked questions on traveling internationally while you are on H-1B status. Whether you are pondering on the visa stamps, re-entry permits, or how long you can stay outside the United States on your H-1B status, we got you covered. Please stay tuned with us to learn more about traveling internationally while you are on H-1B status.
Before we begin, here's a disclaimer. The information in this video is intended for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. If you need specific guidance regarding your H-1B status, visa applications, or travel matters, please consult a qualified immigration attorney. Neither I, VisaMate, nor anyone associated with this content is responsible for any actions taken based on the information provided. Always check the latest immigration policies with USCIS, the U.S. Department of State, or your legal counsel before making any travel or visa decisions. Now let's dive into the frequently asked questions by H-1B holders regarding international travel. I am currently in the United States in another non-immigrant status. Do I have to depart the United States to obtain H-1B non-immigrant status? Non-immigrants in the United States who wish to obtain a different non-immigrant status generally either apply for a change of status with USCIS or after USCIS approves their benefit request, consular process by applying for a visa in the new classification at a US embassy or consulate abroad, and then requesting admission to the United States in the new classification. In general, you may change to H-1B non-immigrant status without departing the United States. An employer who files an H-1B petition on your behalf can request a change of status on the form I-129, petition for a non-immigrant worker. To be eligible to change your status, you must have been lawfully admitted to the United States as a non-immigrant. Your non-immigrant status must remain valid. You must not have violated the conditions of your status, and you must not have committed any act that would make you ineligible to receive a non-immigrant benefit. Also, certain non-immigrant categories are ineligible for a change of status. For example, people admitted into the US on certain visa waiver program as a crew member and so forth. If you need to depart the United States, for example, if your current non-immigrant status expires before your employer is able to file Form I-129 requesting a change of status to H-1B classification, you would generally need to apply for and obtain an H-1B visa stamp from a US embassy or consulate abroad and present yourself at a port of entry for admission in H-1B status with U.S. Customs and Border Protection after the approval of the H-1B petition filed on your behalf. Can I travel internationally while on H-1B status? Yes, as an H-1B visa holder, you can travel internationally as long as you have the necessary documents for re-entry into the U.S. There is no restriction on the number of times you can travel in and out of the US while on H-1B status. However, each time you re-enter, you must demonstrate that you are maintaining valid H-1B status and continuing employment with your sponsoring employer. Do I need a visa stamp to re-enter the US? Yes. If you are traveling internationally, you must have a valid H-1B visa stamp in your passport to re-enter the United States. If your visa stamp has expired, you will need to apply for a new visa at a US consulate abroad before returning. What documents should I carry when traveling outside the US? When traveling on the H-1B visa, you will require the following documentation to re-enter the US. 1. Valid passport with at least 6 months of validity at the time of admission to the US. 2. Valid H-1B visa stamp in your passport obtained from a US consulate abroad. 3. Original H-1B approval notice. 4. Current letter from your hiring department verifying continued employment. It should be less than 6 months old. Your H-1B petition supporting letter will suffice if less than 6 months old. 5. Copy of the H-1B petition materials, labor condition application, I-129 petition and supporting letter. 6. Several recent pay stubs as evidence of continued employment. This is generally not necessary for initial employment. 7. For H-1B dependents, proof of the relationship to H-1B principal, for example, marriage certificate, birth certificate. Please note, if you have changed employers since first entering the US in H-1B status and have a valid unexpired H-1B visa annotated for the previous employer, you may re-enter the US using that visa, presenting the valid H-1B approval notice and the H-1B petition materials by the new employer upon re-entry to the US. Can I re-enter if my visa stamp has expired but my H-1B petition is still valid? No, you cannot re-enter the US with an expired visa stamp. Even if your H-1B petition is still valid, you must apply for and obtain a new H-1B visa stamp at a US consulate abroad before you can return. Is the Dropbox or interview waiver applicable if my H-1B visa stamp has expired but my petition is still valid? If your H-1B visa stamp has expired and you need a new visa to re-enter the US, you must apply for a new visa at a US consulate abroad. However, you might qualify for the Dropbox program and avoid an in-person interview if you meet all of the following criteria. Eligibility for the Dropbox or interview waiver program. 1. Your prior H-1B visa was issued in the same category, H-1B, and in your home country. 2. Your previous visa is still valid or expired within the last 48 months, subject to consulate-specific policies. 3. You have no history of visa refusals, unless later overcome with an approval. 4. You are applying at the same US consulate that issued your previous visa, though some consulates may allow Dropbox at other locations. 5. Your passport is valid for at least 6 months beyond your intended US entry date. If you do not meet this criteria, you must schedule a visa interview at a US consulate before re-entering the US. How to confirm your Dropbox eligibility. Regardless of your location, when applying for a US visa renewal, you will be required to complete an online visa application form or DS-160 and go through the visa scheduling process on the US Department of State's website. During this process, you will be asked a series of questions to determine whether you qualify for Dropbox submission or if you need an in-person visa interview. What happens if my visa renewal is delayed or denied while I'm outside the US? If your H-1B visa renewal is delayed due to administrative processing, you may have to remain outside the US until the issue is resolved. Administrative processing can take weeks or even months depending on the case. To avoid extended delays, always check processing times and ensure all documents are complete before applying for renewal. If your H-1B visa renewal is denied, you cannot re-enter the US unless you can successfully obtain a new visa. You may need to explore alternative visa options or reapply. Before traveling, always check visa appointment availability and processing times at the US consulate where you will apply. This helps you anticipate any potential delays. Can I enter on a tourist visa if my H-1B is still valid but I don't have a visa stamp? No. If you enter the US on a tourist visa, for example, B1, B2, you will not be allowed to work and your H-1B status will not be activated. You must obtain an H-1B visa stamp to re-enter in the correct status. How long can I stay outside the US without affecting my H-1B status? There is no fixed maximum duration for staying outside the US while holding H-1B status. but prolonged absences may raise concerns about maintaining employment and status. The impact depends on the length of the absence. Less than 6 months, typically short trips abroad, do not affect H-1B status. However, upon re-entry, you may need to confirm that you are still employed by your H-1B sponsor. More than 6 months, absences exceeding 6 months may trigger scrutiny. USCIS or CBP officers may request proof that your US employer maintained your position and that your H-1B employment remains valid. More than 1 year, if you remain outside the US for over a year, your employer may need to file a new H-1B petition. If you plan to be outside the US for an extended period, maintaining active payroll records, company communications, and documentation of remote work, if applicable, can help support your continued H-1B employment upon return. Can time spent outside the US be recaptured to extend my H-1B? Yes, time spent outside the US can be recaptured to extend your H-1B status. The law allows H-1B holders to add back any days, weeks, or months spent outside the country during their 6-year period, effectively extending their stay. For example, if you were outside the US for a total of 8 months over the course of your H-1B status, your employer can request an H-1B extension for those 8 months, allowing you to remain in the US beyond the original 6-year cap. How can I reset my 6-year H-1B limitation by staying 1 year abroad? Do I need to go through the lottery process? If you have reached the maximum 6-year limit on your H-1B status, you can reset the clock by staying physically outside the United States for a continuous period of at least 1 year. To qualify, you must remain physically outside the US for 12 consecutive months, except for brief trips for business or pleasure on another visa, which do not count toward fulfilling the 1-year requirement. You may reside in any country outside the US, so it does not have to be your home country. After completing 1 full year outside the US, your employer can file a new H-1B petition. If your employer is subject to the H-1B cap, you must go through the lottery. However, if your employer is cap exempt, you do not need to go through the lottery and can file a new H-1B petition directly. Can I re-enter the US within 30 days using my H-1B approval notice if I don't have a valid H-1B visa stamp? Generally, no. If you do not have a valid H-1B visa stamp in your passport, you cannot re-enter the US solely based on your H-1B approval notice. However, there is an exception known as automatic visa revalidation, AVR, that may allow you to return under specific conditions. Under the automatic revalidation rule, you may be able to re-enter the US without a valid H-1B visa stamp if 1. You are traveling to Canada or Mexico for less than 30 days. 2. You have an expired H-1B visa stamp but a valid Form I-94 showing unexpired H-1B status. 3. You do not apply for a new visa during your trip. 4. You are not a citizen of certain countries subject to additional restrictions, example, Iran, Syria, North Korea, etc. If you are traveling to a country other than Canada or Mexico, or if you are applying for a new visa while abroad, you must wait until your new visa is approved before re-entering the US. Please note, before relying on automatic visa revalidation, always check the latest immigration policies and consult with an immigration attorney to ensure you meet the requirements. Can my H-4 dependents travel internationally without me? Yes. H-4 dependents, spouse, and children under 21 can travel internationally without the H-1B visa holder. However, for re-entry into the United States, they must carry the same documents required for an H-1B holder plus valid proof of relationship, for example, marriage certificate and birth certificate. My employer filed an H-1B petition on my behalf and it is pending at USCIS. If I travel internationally, will the H-1B petition be affected? If your employer has filed an H-1B petition on your behalf and it is still pending with USCIS, international travel can significantly impact your case. A change of status to H-1B requires you to be physically present in the United States while the petition is pending. If you leave the country before USCIS approves your petition, your change of status request will be considered abandoned. In this case, even if your H-1B petition is later approved, you will not automatically receive H-1B status. Instead, USCIS will issue your approval as a consular notification, meaning you must apply for an H-1B visa stamp at a US embassy or consulate abroad. Once you obtain the visa, you will need to present yourself for admission at a US port of entry, where Customs and Border Protection (CBP) will determine your eligibility to enter the United States in H-1B status. Now, if your employer has filed an H-1B extension of stay on your behalf, the rules are slightly different. While you must be in the US at the time of filing, leaving the country while the extension is pending will not automatically lead to denial. However, to re-enter the US, you may need to apply for an H-1B visa at a US consulate. Your employer can request that USCIS notify the consular office abroad where you will apply. I am in the process of applying for lawful permanent resident status while holding H-1B status. Will international travel affect my adjustment of status application? For most adjustment of status applicants, if you depart the United States with a pending adjustment of status application without first obtaining an advance parole document, USCIS will deny the adjustment of status application for abandonment. Exceptions to this rule exist for a narrow set of non-immigrants, including those holding valid H-1B status. An individual in H-1B status who is not under exclusion, deportation, or removal proceedings may travel while adjustment of status application is pending without first obtaining an advance parole document if 1. Upon returning to the United States, they remain eligible for H-1B status. 2. They are returning to the United States to resume employment with the same employer for which their H-1B is authorized. 3. They are in possession of a valid H-1B visa. Alternatively, an individual in H-1B status who has a pending Form I-485 and who has been granted an advance parole document based on an approved Form I-131 application for travel documents, parole documents, and arrival or departure records may depart the United States without abandoning their Form I-485 application so long as they depart and return during the advance parole documents validity period. I have an employment authorization document EAD based on compelling circumstances and am no longer maintaining H-1B status. Can I travel outside the United States? An EAD based on compelling circumstances does not serve as a travel document or otherwise provide eligibility for readmission into the United States. However, having an EAD based on compelling circumstances does not prevent you from applying for a non-immigrant or immigrant visa at a consular post outside the United States to return to the United States, assuming you are otherwise eligible. USCIS considers an applicant with a valid EAD based on compelling circumstances to be in a period of authorized stay. In addition, USCIS considers the time during which the EAD application was pending to be a period of authorized stay. Therefore, you generally do not accrue unlawful presence during the validity period of the EAD or during the time that a timely filed non-frivolous application is pending. Leaving the United States to apply for a non-immigrant or immigrant visa at a consular post outside the United States while working using the compelling circumstances-based EAD will not trigger the unlawful presence grounds of inadmissibility if you are not subject to those grounds of inadmissibility from other circumstances.
We have answered some most commonly asked questions on traveling internationally while you are on your H-1B. I believe you might have additional questions or concerns that have not been covered in this video. You can leave your questions or comments in the comment box and we will try to address your questions or comments in one of our future videos. If you would like to have my service for your H-1B petition or any process related to your H-1B, please Google me. My name is Mahmudul Hasan. I'm an immigration attorney. Please consult an immigration attorney before you take any immigration action. Thank you very much for watching this.